I want to begin today's class by saying thank you to Russ and those at Bible Way Media Classroom for having confidence in me to fill in this Christian evidence class for the next few weeks. I appreciate this opportunity and look forward to the next few classes, having looked at the last three there, and in particular this class on today's lesson, What About Dinosaurs? But before we get into that, I also want to apologize up front. I've been feeling a bit under the weather this week and lately, and so I have a bit of a cough, and so I apologize. I have some water here to keep me hydrated, and so if I have to make a few pauses here or there to take a sip, I apologize up front as we try to get through this lesson today. As I mentioned, the lesson is on what about dinosaurs? There are three questions we're really going to ask in this particular class concerning this topic. The first one is, can evolution have dinosaurs and humans living side by side? That's really the question, isn't it? When we talk about dinosaurs, comparing it to the scriptures, Genesis chapter 1 and following, is it possible for the theory of evolution to allow, or is it even possible to have humans and dinosaurs side by side? The second question we're going to ask is it physically possible that dinosaurs and humans live side by side? And then lastly, is there any evidence that dinosaurs and humans actually did live together or live side by side? How they interacted? Is there any evidence in this world to suggest it? Because, of course, most of your science will turn away from that idea. So let's go ahead and look at our first question for today. Can evolution, the theory of evolution, can it have dinosaurs and humans living by each other, next to each other, working together with each other? Is it even possible for those two things to harmonize? Now, I'm not going to get into much detail in this particular class in explaining how evolution is wrong in comparison to Genesis chapter 1. You've already had that in your second week class, and so I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on that. We will talk about it for a moment and get into it a little bit, but we're not going to get real deep into it, so I wanted to say that right off. So let's go back to our question. Can evolution have dinosaurs and humans walking together, if you will, living together, cohabitating together, much like we see today with humans and other animals? Well, to answer that question, we got to go back a little bit and examine the evolutionary timeline. Sorry. The evolutionary timeline. Now, this is continually fluctuating and changing because in the theory, as they find new things and they miscalculate new things based on false information, they change the timelines, and it keeps getting longer and longer, but we're going to go off this basic timeline. Basically, what they say is the Earth was formed roughly 4.5 billion years ago. This is the evolutionary timeline. They say life began from non-life about 4 billion years ago. So it took about a half a billion years to get the Earth formed and then life to begin from non-life. They'll then say multicellular life begins 1 billion years ago. Now, how they come up with this, it's just guesswork, but this is their basic idea. Land and plants began about 500 million years ago. They say dinosaurs go extinct roughly 65 million years ago, and human life begins. Now that's a key word there, begins in this evolutionary shift, begins roughly 3 million years ago. They'll go so far as maybe 100 to 200,000 years ago. We see modern man as he would look, and that's even pushing it to their standards. But this is the basic evolutionary timeline. So, according to evolutionists, is it possible that humans and dinosaurs could even possibly exist? Is there any way they consider it a possibility? John Clayton, who is a theistic evolutionist, in other words, someone who believes in God, but believes God used either gap theory or day-age theory to start the process of evolution and then kind of let it go from there. Well, John Clayton is a theistic evolution, and he said in one of his books, it is ludicrous to suggest that man cohabitated with the dinosaurs. Man could not have lived in a world full of dinosaurs, so by the time God created Adam, the dinosaurs were gone. So you see, it's ludicrous. Here's a man who believes in God, but believes also in evolution. And he says, listen, it's ludicrous. It's not a possibility. There's no possible way. One man wrote in 2011, humans are, remember what we talked about as we see us today, humans are 200,000 years old. There's a gap of 64.8 million years between the death of the last dinosaur and the birth of the first human. Final conclusion, humans and dinosaurs never coexisted on the planet. So you see the theme that keeps coming up with this. This is the idea. Atheists and those who believe in evolution, theistic evolutionists, they can't coexist, dinosaurs and humans. In a book titled Abusing Science, The Case Against Creationism, evolutionist Philip Kitcher wrote that solid evidence for humans and dinosaurs cohabitating would, notice this, shake the foundations of evolutionary theory. Because, of course, the dinosaurs are supposed to have been long extinct by the time humanoids arrived on the scene. Now think about that for a second. If it can be shown, he says, that dinosaurs and humans were side by side, it would shake the very foundations of evolutionary theory. And this is really the core of it. They cannot allow for these two groups, dinosaurs and humans, to be next to each other, to live at any point and at any time in the same realm. And so what they'll do is they say, listen, it's not a possibility. If it happened, then we'd have to re-examine everything, which of course they should. But here's one of the prevailing reasons. It's an interesting reason, but here's one of the prevailing reasons for why they don't think humans and dinosaurs could physically have lived side by side. And the prevailing reason is because they're just simply so big. We would be outmatched. We wouldn't be able to handle them. And they give statistics for this. They'll say, look at the Tyrannosaurus rex, if you will. It was 47 feet long. Floor to hip bone alone was 20 feet tall or 2 stories high, and it raised 3 stories high. Its skull alone was 5.5 to 6 feet long. All right, so they'll say, look at these things. Or what about the Apatosaurus or the Brontosaurus? They'll say, look how big this thing is. It's 74 feet long, weighed 45,415 pounds. Just to give you an idea, that's the weight of 4 elephants about. Well, there's others like the Argentosaurus. It was 127 feet long and weighed 110 tons, they say, or 220,000 pounds. And so these are the types of things you get to hear. These are the types of things that people are going to talk about. They're going to say, listen, it is impossible for humans and dinosaurs to have lived next to each other. As one man put it, it's ludicrous. There's that word again. It's ludicrous to suggest that man cohabitated with dinosaurs. Man could not have lived in a world full of dinosaurs. In an article titled Dinosaurs and Humans Living Together, Mass Hysteria. You can kind of hear the sarcasm there. Well, listen to the sarcasm of this author's statement. He says, those, in other words, they or them who would believe dinosaurs and humans could live together, think that Grok had a pet triceratops and had to avoid being eaten by a Tyrannosaurus rex when out hunting. So, this is the problem, I guess you could say, isn't it? This is where we are dealing with difficulties because evolution suggests, and even theistic evolutionary people who are growing, by the way, especially in the denominational world, but sometimes even in the church, we're seeing this growth. We're seeing this develop. We're seeing this idea of theistic evolution becoming more and more popular. Well, God started something and it just began because they can't wrap their head around This idea of these huge animals not just squashing us as peanut human beings. Now, here's the interesting thing. It doesn't take long, really, if you just go back and look at the science and go back and study dinosaur bones as we have. It doesn't take long to see that the average size of a dinosaur isn't what is portrayed in the movies. It isn't what is portrayed by most of those who would write these fantasizing books on evolution. We've been led to believe that for the most part all dinosaurs are these huge oversized reptiles that would crush all human life out of existence. That they would just simply destroy humans. There's no way we could cohabitate with them. Just to give you an idea, remember Jurassic Park when it came out? Man, the fantastic imagery. I remember as a kid watching that in the theater and seeing the animals on screen and how amazing it. You know, everything was huge for the most part. Well, this is the extent by which we see people fantasizing and imagining dinosaurs. You remember the velociraptor, really the main one that's trying to destroy everybody. In Jurassic Park, the velociraptor is seen as this 7-foot hunting machine with razor claws that could slice a human open with just one movement. Well, in reality, the velociraptor is really only 3 feet tall, and with a claw that could be easily cut with a pair of toenail clippers. That's the reality. The velociraptor was made up. It was exaggerated. It was made to seem because a 3-foot tall dinosaur that can't really hurt you too bad, well, that doesn't scare anyone. If we were to ask people what the average size of a dinosaur is, if you were to just kind of do a random poll and ask what is the average size of a dinosaur, no doubt we would see the same thing we see in Jurassic Park. Everything, for the most part, huge, extremely large, very large, all these kinds of things. You hear people about Tyrannosaurus Rex and Brontosaurus, those kinds of things, these huge animals. And so there goes that idea. But the reality is, the facts are, the average size of a dinosaur is about the size of a rhinoceros. Now think about that for a second. Are there big animals? Sure. There's animals bigger in this world than a rhinoceros. But are there big animals and small? There was all size. The average size of the excavated bones, the average size of a dinosaur, as we call dinosaurs, is that of the size of a rhinoceros. So when we go back and we ask the question, could humans physically live with dinosaurs, and then we just go and say, well, the average is that of basically a rhinoceros-sized dinosaur. Well, sure. Humans have been able to train and to some extent domesticate all sorts of huge animals. Elephants, hippos, lions, tigers. I mean, think about it. We as humans have been able to train killer whales. A fish, for lack of a better term. A killer whale. If we can train a killer whale well enough to put our heads inside of it and it not bite it off, or a lion or a tiger or a hippo, if we're able to train an elephant well enough to stand and do tricks, do we really think we couldn't live with dinosaurs? I mean, do we honestly think that we couldn't harness, domesticate, and train a triceratops, for example? To maybe help with the plowing of fields. Excuse me. Do we honestly think that this isn't possible? The reality is, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that it is not only possible, it's very likely, which brings us to the third question we're going to look at, considering what we've talked about. Is there evidence? Can we look throughout the world and find evidence that dinosaurs and humans were actually living together? Is there anything? So we're going to look at a few things. First and foremost, the Bible clearly and demonstrably declares that there is biblical evidence for dinosaurs and humans living at the same time. Does the Bible talk about dinosaurs? Well, yes and no. What I mean by that is the word dinosaur, which means fearfully great lizard or reptile, the word dinosaur didn't actually exist until 1842. In 1842, the first dinosaur bones were discovered and talked about and mentioned. Okay, and so the term dinosaur wouldn't be found in the Bible when you consider that the Bible was completed about 1900 years ago and didn't even get into really all English and what we wouldn't even consider English, but all English until 1535. Okay, so when we're talking about the word dinosaur, you're not going to find the word dinosaur in the Bible. You could use it. It'd be an appropriate translation in the verses we're going to talk about here in a second. But you don't actually find that word because it didn't even exist until 1842. So keep that in mind. So does the Bible talk about animals, would be a better way of saying it, that fit the description of dinosaurs? You better believe it. The behemoth in Job chapter 40, verses 15 through 24, is a great example, whether people want to admit it or not, but it is a perfect example of a dinosaur. The Leviathan in the very next chapter, Job 41, verses 1 through 34, really. The Leviathan is a great example of a dinosaur, fire-breathing dinosaur. The Bible makes it clear that dinosaurs and humans were created and were together on the sixth day of creation. And then also mentions them in the book of Job. So, when we look at evolution, this is what I talked about. We're going to slightly kind of move into this. When we look at the Bible gives evidence, very clear evidence, that humans and dinosaurs, as we call them today, would have been created on the sixth day. Now, in Genesis chapter 1, we see that God created on that sixth 24-hour day. On that sixth day, he created humans and land animals. All right. Now, here's the kicker. When we talk about the Bible and evolution, evolution is impossible if you believe the Bible. Now, how do we know that? The Hebrew word for day is the word yom in Hebrew. Okay, so the Hebrew word for day is the word yom, and every single time, notice this, every single time we see a number or numeral type wording used with the Hebrew word yom, it means 24-hour period. Whether it's first day, second day, 354 days later, every time you see the word yom with a number, it means 24-hour period. Now, think about this. The words evening and morning in the Bible are always defined as a 24-hour period throughout the Old Testament. Now, we could go on and on and on about this. The word day in Hebrew can mean multiple things. It can mean 24-hour period. It can mean a set point in time. In fact, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 use the word yom in its different times. It can mean an unspecified amount of time. There's no denying that. But every single time you put a numeric number with it, or evening and morning with it, not if you don't count Genesis chapter 1, the 2,000 plus times you find it, chapter 2 and following, every single time, no one argues, there's zero argument about it meaning a 24-hour period. So that tells you the Bible defines itself. So the Bible is clear that on the 6th 24-hour day, God created man and all animals. Now here's what else it says. We notice from the scriptures that God created everything. Notice Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So God is the creator of the heavens and the earth. Look at chapter 2 and verse 1 with me. Thus the heavens and the earth, and notice all, not some, all the hosts of them were finished. So God created everything, all the hosts in the heavens and the earth, in that 6-day period. Psalm 33 and verse 6. By the word of the Lord the heavens were made, notice, and all the hosts of them by the breath of his mouth. In John chapter 1 and verse 3, notice what it says about Jesus. In John 1 and verse 3, all things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. Was it some things or all things? Was it a few things or just a couple of things? Or was it all things? No, the Bible is clear. Every single thing was created by God within 6 24-hour periods. Secondly, so the Bible's clear that dinosaurs and humans were on the earth at the exact same time. The second thing we notice is that secular literature actually proves this as well. One of the overwhelming thoughts against humans and dinosaurs living side by side at the same era, at the same time, is that people say it is odd that humans did not write more about these animals. Wouldn't we see humans writing about these dinosaurs? Wouldn't we hear and find writings concerning that? And that's the argument. Listen, we don't see that, so they didn't exist. But that's actually not true. In fact, that's a completely false statement. Because remember, the word dinosaur is not found in ancient writings of any kind because it was not coined until 1842. So the word dragon is used instead of dinosaurs by ancient writers. That was the common word for these types of creatures. The word dragon means in Middle English, from the Anglo-French dragon, or from Latin, means serpent, dragon, or huge serpent. So it's very easy to see why ancient people and ancient writers, because they don't have the word dinosaur, would write about these great beasts, these great lizard beasts and things of this nature, but they wouldn't call them dinosaurs. They called them actually dragons. And it's interesting fact about dragons that there is only one continent. Now think about all the continents in the world. There's only one continent where we have not found people writing about dragons, and that continent is Antarctica, where we don't find humans. Antarctica is the only continent in the entire world where people through the centuries have not been writing about dragons. Carl Lindell, contributing writer for the World Book Encyclopedia, wrote this: every country had them in its mythology. Now, they don't consider them real, but they have to admit that everybody writes about them. A man named Bates wrote, no other creature in the world, notice that, no other creature in the world has had such a far-reaching influence on the minds of so many people. Think about no other creature in the world. Animal Planet in 2005 had a program titled Dragons, a Fantasy Made Real. And in that program they had this: there is one creature remembered in the legends of almost every human culture, and I would suggest every human culture, that's ever existed. A creature depicted with remarkable similarity by the Chinese, the Aztecs, even the Inuit, who live in a frozen land where no reptiles are found. Even they have stories of this animal, the dragon. Cultures from different continents, people who had no contact with one another, yet all of them have stories describing the same mythical animal. So did people write about dinosaurs in ancient times? You better believe they did. Now, this has even led, because they can't deny it, this has even led some atheists to acknowledge that there has to be a connection here. Carl Sagan, for example, an atheist, said the pervasiveness of dragon myths in the folk legends of many cultures is probably no accident. So he's saying, listen, there's a connection here. It's probably not an accident. But to harmonize evolution, as an atheist, harmonize evolution with this, what he says isn't that man and dinosaurs lived at the same time. No, he says, as we evolved, we kept the memories of these great creatures in our lives. Our ancestors who were scared to death of these predatory lizards. It was burnt into their memory, and as they evolved, that memory kept coming in so that everybody had this memory of dragons. It's just crazy what these guys are going to come up with. These men and women who believe in evolution, the things they have to try to figure out in order to eliminate the secular evidence, not just the biblical evidence, but the secular evidence that dinosaurs and people were actually together. There is no way of explaining why every culture, separated by thousands and thousands of miles, and had no communication whatsoever for the most part, talk about similar animals, similar reptilian creatures, with few differing distinctions. Think about that. With very few distinctions. Now, with that being said, we are human after all, and that doesn't mean that there aren't embellishments. Like any human document, there's going to be from time to time embellishments, but it does not negate the existence of the account. Let me give you an example. How many people go fishing and tell exactly how big the fish is they caught? We've got lots of writings about the things people do and the fishing stuff and how they fish. They embellish a little bit the size of the fish if it does not negate the fact that they caught a fish, does it? Just because they embellish how big the fish is doesn't mean they didn't catch a fish. So you see how that works? Just because there's some embellishments doesn't mean it wasn't caught, or they weren't known, or they weren't seen. In fact, there is more literature evidence than the supposed dragon legends. There's lots of evidence that talk about these serpents or these great dragons. Herodias, for example, who lived roughly about 450 BC, wrote this. There is a place in Arabia to which I went on hearing of some winged serpents. And when I arrived there, I saw bones and spines of serpents in such quantities as it would be impossible to describe. The form of the serpent is like that of a water snake, but he has wings without feathers, and is like as possible to the wings of a bat. Kind of interesting, huh? Josephus, a great Jewish historian, wrote, when the ground was difficult to be passed over because of the multitude of serpents, which it produces in vast numbers, some of which ascend out of the ground unseen and also fly in the air, and some come upon men at unawares and do them a mischief. Moses invented a wonderful stragman to preserve the army safe and without hurt, for he made baskets like unto arks of sage, and filled them with birds, and carried them along with them, which animals is the greatest enemy to serpents imaginable. For they fly from them, even they come near them, and as they fly they are caught and devoured by them. What does all this say? This says that there's plenty of literature out there that talks about dinosaurs, or dragons, or winged serpents, however you want to talk about it. There's tons of evidence of them. It's just if you don't want to see it, you don't care to see it, you won't see it. So there's secular written evidence that proves humans and dinosaurs coexisted. Now, what I'm about to talk about thirdly is there is physical evidence as well that teaches this. You can go look these things up. I will, in the video, I will put a link to some of the images if I can find them. This is some old notes I'm looking at. I'll have to go find some of these things. But you can find the images of humans and interacting, if you will, knowing about dinosaurs even very late into existence. For example, the Kilmer civilization under, and I'm probably going to butcher this name, Kayavaraman the Seventh, in 1186, so 1186, started building the temple of Ta Param in Southeast Asia. All right. Now, this stone temple had a lot of carvings on it, a ton of carvings all over it. One of those carvings, you can see very clearly what we would call a stegosaurus today. It's beyond doubt that this is a stegosaurus. We also, under the Kachina Bridge in southeastern Utah, the third largest natural bridge, there are a lot of paintings dating anywhere from 700 to 1250, 700 to 1,250 years old. Okay, so anywhere from 700 years ago to 1,250 years ago. There's a lot of paintings there. If you go look at those, one of those paintings clearly shows a man right next to a dinosaur, what we would commonly call, I remember growing up, a brontosaurus or something like that. That's in Utah. The Grand Canyon, the most beautiful canyon here in America, the Grand Canyon, more specifically the Havaspai Canyon, we find another drawing of a dinosaur. This was found less than 100 miles from fossils that were dug up. Less than 100 miles of fossilized dinosaur tracks and dinosaurs. There's a cave drawing of a dinosaur. Why don't we hear about this stuff? Well, they don't want you to know. In the town of Cambro, like I said, I'm going to put all this in the link to the video. In the state of, well, let's just say somewhere in Mexico, we find many clay figures that are there that look like dinosaurs, whether brontosaurs or stegosauruses. We see lots of clay animals that were dug up. Now, notice this in 1945, but they only date as far back as the 1600s. So people in the 1600s, think about this, were making clay animals that look just like dinosaurs. They've been dug up, they've been found. Now, here's the one that I find most interesting, personally speaking. The burial stones of the Javar Kabara Darkay, the burial stones of these Inca people, they have dinosaurs on them. They used these stones as headstones for where their people were buried. And we have seen these and taken pictures of these headstones, and they have very intricate drawings on them, and all over them you find dinosaurs and even humans right next to each other in these. Why do I say all this? Why do we talk about all this? Why? The thing is that the Bible can be proven both biblically and secularly that humans and dinosaurs roam the earth at the exact same time. In fact, the truth is that most animals, I think one scientist said 99% of all animals are extinct. Now think about that. There's a reason for that. The flood came and destroyed most of living life. And so when we talk about animals and humans, we talk about these things. Evolution is a farce. They have to keep inventing and making up and lying, really, to hold on to what they want to say. In fact, we're even seeing a shift in neo-Darwinism, or the most basic and what we see taught throughout the schools and everywhere else on evolution. November 2016, one of the most prestigious of all science groups, even having Isaac Newton as their president at one time, the most oldest distinguished scientific groups got together in November 2016 to discuss the problems with evolution and how neo-Darwinism doesn't really fit. The science isn't fitting. They can't make it fit. Now, they're not saying there's a God there, don't get me wrong. But isn't it interesting that as more people in religion are moving towards theistic evolution, because they get it hammered down them so much, it's almost if you can't beat them, join them type mentality, because they're ignorant about what's going on, we're seeing the scientists start to say, no, there's issues, there's problems here. Ones that can't be resolved, and we have to try to figure it out. They realize that there's problems. Dinosaurs present a major problem with evolution. And when we look at the biblical evidence and we look at the secular evidence, it's beyond a shadow of a doubt that they walked side by side, and that we have plenty of evidence. If we aren't filling our brains with the impossibility of it, there is plenty of evidence to prove this. I hope this class has been informative, and I hope that it will help you in your studies along this line. What about dinosaurs and Christian evidences? and hope that this will help in your teaching of others and helping them see the truth of God's Word.